We start with an examination of family life lived in Germany. We move on to a methodological conversation around anthropology and the spirituality in Jesuit groups. And then we're going to finish off, we are heading to Ireland for our final session. So I'm ever so excited to see, and particularly this is the rapidly changing situation in Ireland and how a reality of really lived Catholicism amongst student teachers. So, and that's going to be absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to, we're going to run this in the way that we did before. So put your questions onto, put your thoughts and your comments onto the chat as you go, put your questions onto the Q&A. What we will do is, because we want it to be really interdisciplinary and bring lots of conversations together, we're going to run the 3 papers back to back, and then we're going to take all the questions at the end. So do put your questions in for the first 2 papers as you go. Don't think that you'll remember them, because otherwise we'll get lots of questions for the last paper and not so many for the first 2. Right, with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first paper. And ladies, I'm going to leave between you how you handle the pushing backwards and forwards, but very delighted to introduce Professor Gartner and Linda Hennig and, Lila Rutner, who are going to, and I've just mispronounced everybody's name, so I do apologise, but I'm going to hand over to you then to take us away. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I just started the screen sharing. Does it work?
Looks good.
Okay, because we are going to share some family trees. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present a case study out of our ongoing research project on the transmission of religion across generations. Today, we would like to raise one central question. Under which conditions did this family succeed in passing on an intensive and vital practice of Catholicism to the 3rd generation? By 3rd generation, I mean the children. They participated at the family interview, as well as their parents and one grandmother. In order to illustrate what we mean by vital Catholicism, I'm going to speak about the oldest son, born in 2007, and the grandmother, born in Indonesia, and the memory of their first communion. What would you expect a 12-year-old boy to remember of his first communion that he experienced in the age of 9? The huge family celebration, the many gifts? The son remembers the entering in the church with baptismal candles. This points to the religious meaning of the communion as baptismal renewal. He describes the prayer in the afternoon as a special moment of communion. The blessing of the gifts and not their material value is of great importance to him. Surprisingly, for a child of his age, he presents himself as being very seriously interested and involved in the ecclesiastical process of communion, and as interested in the religious ritual he describes. He also differs from his peers in another way. He's an altar boy, and like his 2 siblings, serves regularly and almost every Sunday. The point I want to make here is not that only few children who receive communion become altar servers. That's about 16% in Germany. In fact, he criticizes others who would rather attempt to participate in the altar servers' journeys, but who do not take seriously the duty of serving or are unreliable. Grandmother and grandson both emphasize the central character of the extraordinary aspect of the communion event. The grandson remembers the collective entering into the church and, according to Victor Turner's concept of communitas, an intensive community experience. The grandmother had her first communion in Indonesia, and in her story, communitas is experienced by the impressive size of the event. About 100 communion children are present during the ritual and with their families, and accompanied by children who had received communion the previous year. It is striking that family members of different generations remember the festive and solemn admission into the Catholic community in a very positive way, although they were confirmed under completely different social conditions. In the Indonesian region the grandmother was raised, Catholicism is the majority religion. Her grandson grows up in a situation of religious difference. The majority of his peers, including Muslim, Protestant, and non-affiliated children, do not take communion. We see that the extraordinary experience of communion is a family tradition. My next point is the passing on of a positively experienced commitment to the Church. Both family lineages show a pronounced connection to church institutions. In the first generation, 2 men started consecration service. The fact that the family designates one of the sons for a church ordination leads to the hypothesis of a strong commitment to the Catholic Church already in the generation of the great-grandparents. The connection to the international institutional Catholicism occurs both in the family on the father's side and in the family on the mother's side. In addition, in the maternal line, there's a religious connection to the Styler missionaries, through whom the grandmother from Indonesia met her later husband. Catholicism is the unifying factor despite the different cultures of origin. And even after the laicization of the grandfather and the founding of the family remained attached to the order. The mother grows up in a village and, like everyone else, regularly attends Sunday services, completes all initiation rites, and is temporarily involved in youth groups. She acquires a form of Catholicism characterized by institutional proximity and popular religiosity. By popular religiosity, we understand a form of religiousness that focuses on Catholic rituals and piety practices, as well as feasts of the liturgical year. It generates community joy and appeals to emotions, thus combining celebrations with contemplations. Still in the 1980s, in Germany, we find a milieu Catholicism in some areas, like in the Rhineland, where we interviewed the family. Because of this socialization in a village area with a pronounced Catholic milieu structure, the mother acquires a form of religiosity based on community ties and proximity to church institutions. And for her generation, it is an exception to continue this. In all generations, the church is also a professional field of activity. The mother is a pastoral worker, her brother a Dominican priest. In the paternal branch, we find a sexton and a foreign language secretary at the Bishops' Conference. We now present the following thesis. The positive conditions that exist in this family are no guarantee that a vital form of Catholicism will be passed on to the third generation. The social conditions of advancing secularization does not promote this. Rather, it acquires an active personal contribution based on a conscious decision to continue vital Catholicism. And now I pass over to my colleague Lilo.
Hello. In general, church ties loosen in adolescence. This also applies to both partners of the second generation. For her, as with many young people of her generation, the embedding decreases due to other interests and obligations like studying. However, there is still a continuity through the Sunday service. The fact that she still attends this service regularly can be traced back to the family tradition. The close church ties make it unlikely that she rebelled against it as a teenager. Also, the mother's migration Also, the mother's migration history and the resulting close family ties to each other may play a role here. And in addition, she maintains continuity by attending church services also out of an inner religious motivation. After her ecclesiastical socialization, there's a gap, as we saw in the first interview sequence. In another interview sequence, she says that she was not a group person and wanted her autonomy. This is an evidence for the loosening of her church ties. For the father's family, the distance is more pronounced, and for him, the loss of attachment to the church is really at risk. In terms of family history, this has to do with experiences of sorrow. You can see here on the left side that there had been 2 deaths. There's one death of the first husband of his mother, and the first child of the second marriage also died. In addition to this tragic death, his father, the one here, also had a difficult relationship with the church. These circumstances have led to a more ambivalent relationship passed on to the next generation then to him. We will focus now on how the couple has created the conditions for the transmission of active churchliness. Let me now explain the decision to start a family and the role reflection played here. 3 phases characterize the decision. First, there is a religious difference. Second, a period of reflection sets in, and finally, there's a turning point for a common religious life. First, it is important here that the couple meets at school, but marries certain years after they got to know each other. This can be considered as a testing period for the relationship. And it becomes clear that there is a difference, a religious difference between them. In order to start a family, she wishes for a common religious practice. For a long time, there is no common religious practice of the couple. She goes to church and he doesn't. But out of deep love, she holds on to him. A period of reflection sets in as he deals with the founding of a family. With the founding of a family, a relationship becomes more binding and questions of responsibility arise. In the period before the marriage, he repeatedly reflects on what he would like to pass on to his children he might have, also against the background of his religious socialization, which he had experienced it as negative, with no common practice on Sundays. And his girlfriend probably also opens up a space for reflection too, as she doesn't push him. The turning point of his religiosity and the beginning of the common religious life is then marked by a confession before the wedding. The confession was probably a formal part of the preparation of a Catholic marriage. Our interpretation is confession creates a space to reflect his own family experiences, and this reflection creates a basis for the decision what to pass on to his own children. In other words, how he wants to organize his family life. For her, this confession is a positive sign of affection and his religiosity. it should also not to be neglected that a welcoming and child-friendly parish played an important role, that the wish of a common religious life came into practice. In our project, we use Vern Bengtson's theory of intergenerational religious momentum. This theory takes into account inner family conditions as well as social conditions. To conclude, as Linda has already said, it is important that the decision to live religiously within the family was not a matter of course here. And 3 conditions are conducive for the successful transmission in the case of this family. There is, first of all, the positive space for reflection and the confession. The confession had made the religious side of him sound and led to the desire for a common religious family practice. Secondly, the type of the parish and the atmosphere played an important role. For the young family, it was very important that it was a child-friendly and welcoming parish. And last but not least, the family religious practice is a very important factor for successful transmission. Religious and family life are so well balanced that all family members experience it as positive. For this family, the practice can be described as combining religious activities and family activities in a positive way. Altogether, this had led to a vital Catholicism in the 3rd generation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lilo. There we go. Wonderful. Thank you. What a fascinating study. I love the idea of comparing across generations. We've had one great question already from Alana. So we'll please do put your questions up now for this paper as we switch over to the next paper, and then we'll bring everybody together at the end, if that sounds okay. Thank you very much. So we're now going to hear from Kat. Kat Ajibaid, who is at the London School of Economics and is starting a project with the Jesuits. And Kat, I'm going to hand over to you, because if I say any more, I'm going to mess this up. So would you like to introduce what you're going to talk about in a more accurate way than I am?
Of course. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay. Yes, awesome. So my name is Catherine, and I'm doing a PhD on contemporary Catholicism. In this paper, I'm going to talk about anthropological approaches to relationality in Catholic context, and I'm specifically talking about relationality as it's experienced online. In Trisha's session, she asked there was a really interesting question about where is Catholicism located, and I saw in the chat that somebody said, oh, perhaps at the minute that's on Zoom, and that's definitely a theme that emerges in my paper. Building upon the growing body of work that has been produced in both the ethnography of Catholic communities and the critical reflection on theoretical dimensions on the anthropology of Christianity, this paper draws on anthropological framings of quotidian examples of Catholic spiritual relationality in order to explore how people are spiritually formed in relation to others in online spaces. The aim is to better understand diverse configurations of Catholicism in relation to the contemporary anthropology of Christianity by reflecting on what impact the increase of Catholic activity online during the pandemic may have on empirical studies of lived Catholicism. Therefore, this paper asks, what does attending to lived Catholicism online tell us about Catholic relationality? And secondly, why might an emic engagement with this question be important for studies of lived religion beyond Catholicism? Within the anthropology of Christianity, the study of Catholicism was deferred due to the disciplined prioritization of an engagement with Protestantism. The reason for this, as argued by anthropologist Fenella Cannell, is that a loose reading of Max Weber ingrained in anthropologists a linear narrative by which Protestantism displaces Catholicism. Therefore, Protestantism was taken not only as a more sophisticated form of religiosity, but as one that raised important anthropological questions capable of capturing the moral challenges faced by individuals and communities in processes of modernization and Christianization in the contemporary world. However, the current state of the field allows for a more significant exploration of various forms of Catholic religious practices. This is particularly relevant to anthropological insights into how relationality features in the imagination and lived experiences of Catholics. Such insights are distinguished by the methodologies employed by anthropologists, who have shown that the study of relationality is dependent on an emic engagement. This is evident in ethnographic studies where religious identity is shown to be relationally constructed, quote, through the making and remaking of potentially transformative relationships with others, and in particular, through the making of asymmetric relations with human and supernatural superiors. This has led anthropologists working within Catholic contexts to theoretically prioritize relationships as crucial to understanding human religiosity, and as such, central to understanding the formation of Catholic subjectivities. Therefore, I propose that by extending such insights into how relationality is constructed and experienced in online contexts, we can begin to understand how lived Catholicism has the capacity to cultivate embodied relationships in immaterial spaces in a socially and spiritually formative way. My focus on Catholic relationality online is centered on the experiences of Catholics who used online spaces and platforms to substitute their religious practices as masses and public collective worship were suspended in the UK during the first national lockdown in response to the coronavirus pandemic. On Friday, the 20th of March, 2020, Catholics were urged in a letter written by the bishops of England and Wales to continue to participate in the spiritual life of the Church, quote, by knowing that the Mass is being celebrated, joining in spiritually in that celebration, watching the live streaming of the Mass, following its prayers at home, making an act of spiritual communion. This is how we share in the sacrifice of Christ in these days. These are the ways in which we will sanctify Sunday and indeed every day, end quote. Likewise, the bishops in Scotland encouraged, quote, Catholics where possible to access the live streaming of Holy Mass from local parishes, end quote. The widespread recommendation for the use of technological interventions by Catholic leaders in response to the absence of public collective worship saw online platforms providing a space for collective and spiritual activity. Before presenting my ethnographic data, I would like to note that prior to this moment, where religious leaders encouraged religious engagement online spaces and platforms were already thinking about how to support collective engagement and had been developing their resources to reflect that. Attempting to understand how people relate to one another, particularly in the form of community, played a leading role in directing such changes. In 2017, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, announced that the company would have a focus on building, quote, the social infrastructure for community, end quote, which was a major shift from the original focus on connecting family and friends. Facebook aside, recent research on community growth and online platforms has shown that multiple tools and techniques are used to create and support community engagement. Similarly, for Christian communities, the contextual shift during the coronavirus pandemic resulted in several different forms of online platforms being used to substitute routine collective in-person worship. Towards the end of March, and having used online spaces for religious purposes myself, I recognized an opportunity for an emic engagement with how Catholics were practicing their faith during the national lockdown. I asked several lay Catholics to record their experiences from March to May. My preliminary research documented what platforms were being used, the frequency of usage, and what kinds of spiritual practices were taking place for each of my interlocutors. I wanted to draw on what was relevant to them, so I intentionally left the space for reflection open by asking only one question. I asked whether they felt spiritually nourished during this period, and I would only ask this at the end of the conversation. I received an array of reflections, but the dominant theme present for all my interlocutors was their experiences of relationships to both human and non-human others. As Mary, one of my interlocutors, noted, that connecting through online platforms, quote, has allowed me to see a new side to people I only knew a little of before. Their personalities and spiritualities are coming out in the chat in ways that might seem too personal to offer over coffee after Mass, end quote. Another interlocutor, Jane, told me that, quote, there is an expectation that we all suddenly become communal online and share everything, which is my idea of a nightmare, but of great joy to others. We're all so different. But it was through nature and being in touch with family that I found a clearer sense of God. The network of relationality, as experienced by my interlocutors, allows us to think creatively about several other sub-themes worthy of investigation, such as innovations to normative ways of praying, which led to different experiences of what it means to connect with others for spiritual purposes. Amelia, a practicing Catholic who returned home from university during the national lockdown, told me that, quote, doing group calls introduces a different dynamic, end quote. Amelia explained how typically, when her chaplaincy group would meet in person, smaller groups would be simultaneously engaging in different conversations, while now, quote, we all listen to and check in with each other one at a time, end quote. For her, that had implications for the development of relationships within her group. However, Amelia also highlighted the spiritual consequences of not being able to meet in person, which was the importance of the incarnation for her Christian faith, because, quote, meeting in the flesh and being able to physically celebrate the sacraments is definitely being missed, end quote. Amelia's reflections prompt a consideration of what is meant by community in the Catholic sense that is theologically representative of concepts such as the Incarnation, but materializes in the disembodied interactions taking place online. The nuances of relationality also directs our attention to another prominent theme within these ethnographic accounts. What was also illustrated were experience of a focused yet extended form of connectivity grounded in an established experience of spiritual relationality. Gathering online for religious purposes enabled larger groups of people from all around the world to connect, but people also spoke of a more focused prayer experience. My interlocutor, John, explained that, this is another quote, usually on Sundays, I am involved in the service in one way or another, whether singing in the choir, reading, or acting as a server. Sometimes the roles I have during the service can get in the way of me engaging prayerfully. In lockdown, I don't have to do any of that, so I've been able to engage in the services prayerfully as simply a member of the church, rather than someone helping to keep the show on the road, end quote. His full account also documents how the process of adapting to engaging spiritually online meant that spiritual practices within his household became normalized alongside other household activities. For John, that had significant consequences for the range of his religious community, which not only became outwardly extended, but also came to include his partner, who would not normally participate in religious services, but began to join him during Zoom prayer sessions. For the anthropology of Catholicism, Catholic relationality, as enabled by online spaces and practice within the home, has the potential to enrich Grottogian ethnographies, where the mundane and everyday is shown to have the capacity for an abundance of spiritual meaning. For my interlocutors, it was through the experience of relationships online that the spiritual relevance of what it meant to be separated and connected during the national lockdown, which were themes that dominated lots of articulations of the experience of lockdown, took shape. But this must be understood in relation to the role relationality plays in the imagination and lived experiences of Catholics, which is well documented in anthropological engagements within traditional Catholic contexts. However, by taking into account experiences of Catholic relationality online, it will help to further refine our understanding of the concept and develop more nuanced interpretive perspectives for the broader field. To conclude, anthropology has much to offer to the study of lived religion, but a new challenge is thinking about how we apply this investigation in online spaces. For the anthropology of Catholicism, I anticipate that attending to lived Catholicism online will become more frequent, not just because more Grottogian forms of spiritual engagement are occurring online, but because it provides insight into how different modalities of Catholic relationality features beyond traditional religious contexts and practices, which have long been the focus of the anthropological study of contemporary Catholicism. However, for anthropologists, this poses a potential methodological problem, as online spaces are complex contexts for empirical engagement, and we must consider, what does conducting full-bodied research mean online? I propose that this emphasizes the need for emic methodologies in the study of lived religions, because it is through being in relation to others and attending to their worlds that anthropologists come to comprehend what lived relationality is for their interlocutors. In order to do this, researchers must understand why relationality as a method matters. Otherwise, we risk missing, quote, and this is from Robert Orsi actually, the empirical reality of religion in virtual contexts that feature in much of human life and experiences, end quote. Which also goes for study of lived religion beyond Catholicism. Therefore, anthropologists must develop more dynamic models to interpret the interaction between the material of ethnographic accounts and the continual recalibration of broader cultural and theological paradigms involved in our framing and analysis. To enrich such analysis, anthropologists must seek to engage in cross-disciplinary encounter, which is why interdisciplinary spaces such as this conference is vital to the future and relevance of our work and therefore our discipline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kat. That was wonderful. I love the thought of how does our Catholic imagination that Greeley and others have spoken about and investigated, and also is so brilliant at sort of exploring that. How does that play into online spaces? That's so fascinating. And also the methodological issues you've raised, which I think are very real. Please do put your questions into the chat. I can see them popping up. Some great elements coming up in the chat as well, so that's fantastic, thank you. And I think we will move on, keeping nicely to time, to Adrienne and Patricia's presentation about students, teachers in Ireland. And this is a video, they've done a wonderful video presentation for us. I'm going to ask Martin if he'll run that, and then we'll have them as part of our panel at the end.
So good afternoon, my name is Adrienne Mullally and I teach religious education in Marino Institute of Education in Dublin.
Good afternoon, my name is Trish Kieran and I'm Director of the Irish Institute for Catholic Studies and I teach RE in Mary Immaculate College in the Republic of Ireland.
And we're delighted to present our research with you today from research we started around last March or April with our PME students in the 2 Catholic colleges in Ireland that we work at. So just to give you a very quick background, we worked with these students on what their attitudes were towards their own belief and the non-religious beliefs of the families and students in schools. We used a mixed methods approach where we sent out an online survey and then did some one-to-one interviews afterwards. There are 300 students between the 2 colleges and we had a response rate over 2 phases of 143 students. The age group or the profile was that 64% of the students were between the ages of 18 and 24, 31% were between 25 and 34. And the gender is very reflective of the teaching profession in Ireland, which is predominantly female. 88% of the students identify as female. This is an interesting statistic here where it reflects our interesting schooling system in Ireland. 89% of our primary schools in Ireland are run by the Catholic Church, and this is reflective in this finding here. 97% of our participants went to a Catholic primary school and 89% went to a Catholic secondary school. 50% of the schools in Ireland are also, of secondary schools, are run by the Catholic Church.
So we asked the question, did you receive the sacraments of Eucharist and confirmation? And only 1% said no, 99% said yes. We thought this was extraordinary, but perhaps it's not so extraordinary given that 97% of the cohort attended Catholic primary schools. So they're a heavily sacramentalized cohort, but we'll be asking questions later on about what that means and what level of engagement this group of pre-service postgraduate primary teachers have with the Catholic Church.
So we asked them then, did they identify with having a religious belief or a non-religious worldview currently? And 82% of them said that they did, 20% don't know or said no. When we asked them then what actual beliefs do they identify with, we gave them a choice and they were able to take more than one, which was, I suppose, indicative of the fact that some people have this fluidity of belief. 63 said Roman Catholic, and the rest, as you can see, are some different shades of Christianity and then of no belief. So 33 identified with having no religious belief.
When we asked them, how strongly are you attached to this religious tradition or non-religious worldview, we discovered that 31% are very strongly or rather strongly attached to their religious belief or worldview. And an equivalent number, 31%, are moderately attached, with the remainder being attached rather weakly, very weakly, or ticking that the question was not applicable.
We then asked them if they engage with religious services nowadays, and we got an extraordinary response of 30% said they never go to church anymore, or another 30% said only on specific holy days or celebrations. So that's again very reflective of a disengagement with their faith, and a smaller number then saying they go maybe once a week or once a month.
So we asked them to tick a statement that comes closest to their belief, and 32% of them ticked the statement, I believe in a God with whom I can have a personal relationship. Now, that's at the heart of the Catholic and Christian spiritual tradition. It's at the heart of a committed religious belief. So we were, interested that 68% of them didn't tick this box. And we were thinking of the implications of that for them as future teachers in the largely Catholic primary school system in Ireland, where they will have to be involved in regular prayer and faith formational activities, and currently sacramental preparation. We asked them what comes closest to their beliefs, and 19% said, I don't really know what to believe. And we puzzled this and tried to work out what that might mean in terms of the fact that they're postgraduate students, they have a prior degree, they are highly educated, and yet 1 in 5 almost doesn't really know what to believe. So this ties in with our findings on this kind of uncertainty and fluidity. And 11% of them said, I don't believe in any kind of God, spirit, or life force. And again, this is consistent, slightly above and consistent with the 2016 census findings for the Republic of Ireland, where 1 in 10 people ticked the no religion box.
We then went on to give them a long list of beliefs, of things they might believe in, and asked them to tick whatever different beliefs they had, and got extraordinary findings here, again pointing to a fluidity of beliefs and not necessarily a lived Catholic belief either. 53% said they believe in energy. 53% said souls. Only 39% said they believe in one God, and 37% said they believe in the Holy Spirit. Then we had everything from miracles to spirits, psychics, ghosts, crystals, chi. So again, pointing to a very different belief than the Orthodox Christian faith that they would have grown up with.
And I think it's interesting there that a certain percentage also said, 7% said they believed in gods. So they had a polytheistic understanding of their belief tradition.
Yes. We went on then to say, well, if you have disengaged from your the religion that you once had, what were the factors that affected that decision? And we got a very clear answer that many of them stopped believing in institutional religion, 68%. Which points maybe to the wounded credibility of the church in Ireland. Furthering that, then, sexual abuse of children by religious was very high. 81% said it was a very important reason why they have disengaged with their belief. And then only 22% said that it was a tragedy or a death that kind of shook their faith.
So our research findings are telling us something about the lived experience of Catholicism among this cohort of third level pre-service teachers in Ireland. And we discovered a complex, multi-layered, simultaneous religious and non-religious identity in the cohort. Some of them believing in one God, some of them believing in many gods, many of them not believing in God, many of them not knowing what to believe. So they blend seemingly incompatible and binary beliefs too, because they tick multiple boxes that we might have seen as being inconsistent with each other. So the fluidity of beliefs incorporates traditional Catholic teaching and practices with a wide spectrum of religious and secular traditions from across the world. And it ties in with the findings of Maurice Harman, who's carried out research with children in primary schools in Ireland with 10-year-olds. And his research points to the blended identities of children in schools. And one child in his research said, my parents, well, my dad's atheist, my sister is Christian, my mother is Catholic, they're really religious. My brother, I think he's atheist as well. There's a few atheists in my family, but a lot of them are Russian Orthodox and Christian. I'm Catholic, I think. And another child in this Harman research in 2018 said, I'm a Catholic Buddhist, without seeing any incompatibility between that. So overall, the conclusion of our research is that among our cohort, we are witnessing the paradox of freedom. The more choice they have to choose and to be self-legislating, the less they are capable of committing themselves to any tradition. And Professor Eamon Conway says that in Ireland, that the age we're in seems to be characterised by a commitment to non-commitment. So the lived Catholicism of these future teachers is out of sync with what we might describe as orthodox or conventional articulations of Catholic identity. Attendance at weekly Mass was very small, it was just 11%. Further research is needed to reflect on what these primary and preliminary findings might mean for Catholic identity of younger people and for educators in Catholic schools and faith transmission in Ireland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we look forward to engaging with any questions with you now.
Thank you. What an absolutely fascinating presentation, and really nicely done as well. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I need to stop the recording.
There we go. And I think, wow, I think we just stuck, there we go, all back to normal again. Fantastic, thank you very much. So thank you very much, that was fascinating. I'm scribbling down those statistics as quickly as I could go there, and I know lots of other people will find them very interesting as well. My own research is with Catholic teenagers in this country, and it was fascinating how some of that was resonating around, and actually how some of it wasn't, and I would love to explore both of those aspects with you. Really, really interesting. So thank you to all three of our papers. What a great dive into the current lived Catholicism of family, online Catholicism, and then this kind of fluidity which is going on in Ireland. That was so interesting, and so many resonances going backwards and forwards. So I think what we might do is pick up some of the questions, because I'm really keen to pick up the questions from the early papers, and we've got plenty of time. We've got 20 minutes-ish, and we can bring out some of these. Hopefully, we can bring out some of these themes. Please, let's hear from you, Dr. Gartner.
May I start to answer the questions which are asked? For example, what does it mean, a child-friendly parish? And I have to add that in the beginning of the family founding, when the kids were very little, this family didn't live in the Rhineland, but lived in the area near Frankfurt, in the where we have a different situation. There is no Catholic milieu anymore, and we have a diverse religious situation. And in the community they lived, we have a highly, I would say, high middle class. The majority would be high middle class and of religious diversity, and Catholics are rather in the minority. So there was it when they experienced this child-friendly parish who really invited them to come to the Mass, no matter that the kids were very little and they were not able to keep quiet. And in contrast, in the Rhineland, they had this other parish where they were asked, please come later when your kids are able to be quiet for an hour. And there it was really much more difficult than it was in this Rhine-Main area near Frankfurt. But then they moved. Also the question which Tricia asked about differences for migrants and non-migrants. And of course, in this family, that the grandmother is a migration from Indonesia plays a crucial role. And she and her husband, who was in the Styler missionaries, ordained in that time when they came to know each other, they have a kind of, I would say, very strong commitment to an international type of Catholicism, and she has brought in this very popular kind of Catholicism, which was erasing in the 60s and 70s, and you can't almost find it today. So migration plays a very crucial role, and probably we have the most lively parishes among migrants in big cities. And all I like it very much, and I think it was very impressive for the her own dress, but about the girls from bring them to the altar, and she talked about them as angels. You have this white dress and feel like a little bride. And there was also a question about that the first communion is in a very young age, and which is very true. And it's not all about, or it's almost none about religious content or dogma or so. It's all about community, to feel acknowledged as a little child, to be a part and be invited to be a part of the community. And I think that is what they remember, being invited to be a part of the community. I hope this answers the question.
Thank you. No, that's great. I really, also Alana, which you referred to there about the dresses, she have a very interesting notion of reconnecting with hub Catholicism at certain points in the life cycle, which I think is very interesting. And then asks, how does gender and debates about the feminization of religion play out in this study? You've got your grandmothers and your mothers coming down.
I think we in Germany, at least, or in this family, we observe both. You have this very feminine part and this community feeling in this family, but you have also the mother, her and her brother. You know, her brother, he's ordained, and so there is a situation of competition between the siblings, and while he is out of the world, she studies theology and reflects in this way the religiosity and the religious contents, and she stays within the world, and she lives sexuality, and she founds a family and transmits her religiosity towards her own kids. So we have both this gender aspect, which is bringing in the reflexive sort of religiosity through her engagement, professional engagement in the church.
Do you see that as being, I mean, you said that you mapped this religious and identity through these generations, which was fascinating. And you said, but this isn't enough anymore. You need to have this moment of decision. And I wondered if you could just say a little bit more about that moment of decision, how that played out in the family.
Which decision do you mean among the second generation?
Among the young, among the I think the grandchildren.
Oh, what do you mean by decision? I don't see that there are decisions yet made by the grandchildren, by the third generations, because they are still young. So they participate in what they practice in their family. And in the discussion, in the family interview, this issue came up. Then the parents assume that in a later age, when they are 14 or 15, and they have to be to make their first decision to be confirmed or not. And then the parents are very aware that this should be a decision really made by the member of the church. You cannot force your children anymore that they have to make this decision. Then that is the point where they make decisions for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so they're very aware that the kids can decide differently than the parents want them to decide. Yeah.
Yes, that's the joy of raising teenagers, isn't it? Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. Kat, could we move on? There are some excellent questions for you as well. So I'm just wondering if we can move on to you. Sorry, I'm just looking at that and the questions have all just moved around. That's exciting. Vincent Manning has a very good question about, do you think virtual relations and sources for spiritual engagement will strengthen or weaken the parish? So did you see those as nodes as connections into existing structures, or were they actually alternative virtual structures that were sort of forming through, particularly through lockdown, but as you said beforehand as well?
I think there was definitely an aspect of formation there, because there was a massive practical element, which is that many parishes weren't actually equipped or ready to take on their role as kind of providing something in a virtual space. So I think that, let me just go back to the question. I kind of prepared them in a different way. Just one second.
I think I've just dismissed it as well because we're talking about it. So it's probably flipped to a different bit of the screen. Answer whichever bit of that question you wanted to, Kat. That's fine.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll come back to it, because I kind of collated. I had a few questions on methodology, and I just wanted to talk about that. Emily asked about what I did, and I think Trisha asked about creativity as well. And yes, I did have to be creative, but one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about relationships in this paper is that my relationships with my interlocutors enabled me to think on my feet and be creative, and to reach out to them and to kind of gauge what would be the most appropriate medium for them to reflect their responses. So I had a range of responses in different formats that really best suited my interlocutors. So for people that really wanted to think about it over a space of time, they were happy to kind of record that and keep, I wouldn't say a diary. My supervisor's really keen on spiritual diary, spiritual journals, which you write in every day. I didn't ask my interlocutors to do that because I didn't want that additional pressure for them. I really wanted this to be a reflective practice. And with everything going on with the pandemic, it was quite an intense time. This was definitely not something that I wanted them to feel pressurized into doing. For some people who weren't so happy to write extensive reflections that they kind of built on over time, we had some long chat messages and then Skype. And I don't want to even call them interviews. I would say conversations, again, because of the relationships I already have with them. I would call them friends. They know what I'm doing, they know what I'm interested in, so they were really happy. And in that sense, I was really lucky that they were happy to open themselves up and talk about what they were experiencing. So that really enabled me to be creative and respond to their needs. There's another question here that's got quite a few likes from Trisha about status and hierarchy. I'm picking up on my interlocutor who spoke about the difference in moving online meant that everybody got their individual time to share and everybody had to listen. That's definitely something that I think was structured into spiritual practices online during the pandemic for communities that really used online spaces, and they've seen works really, really well. I think a very interesting thing is that the numbers have steadily stayed the same. So during the pandemic, where you couldn't do collective in-person worship, people were joining all sorts of groups and services online, the numbers, interestingly, I mean, I'm still doing this research, but the numbers still seem to have stayed relatively the same. And I think that that does say something about and if you think about how we're experiencing this now and how Zoom works as a mechanism for us, I think that there is something very interesting happening with these online platforms and what they enable in terms of how people interact with each other. But having said that, there was a side comment which I kind of had, but I didn't mention in case I ran out of time, which I wanted to elaborate a bit more on, is that these spaces don't work for everybody. One of my interlocutors, as you said, she doesn't like using online platforms. And so I just want to make sure that I answer your question properly. But I see a lot of hope for online spaces in enabling the flattening of hierarchies in more traditional contexts. But then again, they don't work for everyone. So that's still a question that I'm figuring out. There's another question here, so from Ross Stewart Buttle. That's a really good question, and I actually use the word disembodied provocatively because in my current research, in a different space, somebody was talking about their experience of connecting with someone for spiritual purposes via the phone. They were very unhappy about this. They did not enjoy it. And they went as far as to say, it doesn't work. It feels like you're talking to a disembodied person. How can you connect? And I thought that was such an interesting way of phrasing it. So I don't think that all online activity is disembodied. It's a word that I use because it's something that I'm still thinking about now, but I think that's a really great question. Let me just check to make sure that I've answered everyone.
I think it's been fascinating, this whole, like, where are we? It makes me think of Bruno Latour's thinking around place and space, and just to say, you know, where are we right now? We're clearly spread around the world, but we're all connecting somewhere. And that's fascinating to me. And how we, as Anna says, you know, how does embodiment and materiality work on online spaces? There's been quite a lot of experimentation around in church services and things around trying to bring an element of materiality, even if it's just lighting a candle and holding it up to the cameras, just to say we're all doing this together. It's just been fascinating.
Yeah. I'll leave it there, but if anybody has any questions, then feel free to email me, or you want to chat about anything, please email me or Twitter, DM, or whatever you like.
Excellent, thank you. And then Adrienne and Tricia, there were some great questions for you as well. If you, I'm hoping you're still there. I'm assuming you are. Would you like to switch on your cameras and your microphones? Yes, fantastic. Tricia put a question up here in terms of, you know, you use the word capable to describe the possibility of commitment to more than one tradition. Did you mean capable or more like willing? How many spheres? What is the difference between being capable of being committed to more than one tradition and being willing to commit to more than one tradition? I wondered what you thought of that.
I think that the word capable, I suppose that was an extemporaneous word that I was using at the very end to explore the paradox of choice. And clearly the cohort are capable of committing, because 31% of them said that they were very, you know, strongly committed to their belief tradition, and 31% said they were moderately committed. So they are capable and they are willing to commit. I think what I was trying to tease out, or what the research was trying to tease out, Adrienne and myself are trying to tease out, is perhaps what we were thinking of as the paradox of choice, that the greater the number of choices that people have in the contemporary world, the more difficult it is sometimes to commit to any one tradition, because there are so many interesting and dynamic traditions. So I think it was that kind of ambivalence and that kind of flexibility that we were perhaps reflecting on. So I do think they are capable, and I do think they are willing, but I think it's very challenging to commit. Adrienne, is that correct?
Yeah, hear, hear. Was there another question? I can't see the question.
Yeah.
Was there another one, Avril? Or?
Somebody, Maya, told us of Lois Lee's work on authentic versus non-authentic religious ambivalence. I will definitely look at that. Maybe Aveen is familiar with it. I'm not. Astrid asked us, do we have any thoughts on how the teacher profession affects people's beliefs? And that a study from Denmark on teachers and social workers showed that the care environment created a high level of non-orthodox beliefs. Could this also apply to our study? Well, Astrid, thank you so much for that, because we'll have a look at that study in Denmark. What I can say anecdotally, and I'm not familiar with any research being done on this in Ireland, is that teachers in multi-belief contexts, which is every classroom in Ireland, very often they speak of high levels of anxiety sometimes about not offending anybody. And this is particularly in Catholic schools too, where there are a range of beliefs in a class in a Catholic school. There is this feeling of unease at presenting a confessional religious program whose aim is to foster faith in one tradition. So there's a dissonance there in classrooms, and that is something that perhaps we could look at in the future. So thank you for that. Aveen, can you see none of these comments?
I'm just finding them here now. I can see them. Yeah.
Ross
Okay.
Stewart Buttle asked an interesting question, which is, say, to what extent does a declining theological adult literacy affect the plurality and fluidity of belief? And you've got such distinctive generations in Ireland with that, haven't you?
Yeah.
Do you want to answer? Yeah.
I suppose our experience in Ireland, and I'm sure in other countries, is very much after they leave primary school, which 89% of our primary schools are Catholic, and they are very much churched and sacramentalized during that time, that many of them don't progress in their faith from the age of 12. And I find, speaking to many students now at third level, they have still got the faith that they had at the age of 12. So there's that lack of adult theological literacy is a huge challenge here, as I'm sure it is in other countries. And again, these people are going on to be the teachers in our Catholic schools and to catechize and be involved in the formation of children when they themselves maybe don't have a strong religious literacy either.
It's such an interesting situation in Ireland. I'm just going to throw in my own question here. Would you see that it's still in flux, or that it's settling in a sort of post-Catholic way? How do you see things working out?
Great question. Are we settling, Trish? I do think this has been happening for maybe a decade now, has it? At least.
I see huge changes. I don't think we're anywhere near settling. And I definitely think it's decades long, maybe since the 60s or the 70s, but the change has been compounded really quickly in the last decade, because we've had lots of legislative reform in Ireland, and we've had huge changes in our country. Many of them are very positive changes, but I don't see this, settling. I think we're facing choppy waters in Ireland when it comes to Catholicism. There's huge renewal, and there are pockets of renewal, and there's great energy, and people tend to be. I thought our graph looking at commitment was interesting, because it was almost split three ways: very committed, moderately committed, and not committed at all. So I think that's the way we're going. The numbers are definitely going to shrink, and maybe we focused too much on numbers and traditional teachings in the past, but the people who are engaged in Catholic education or in Catholic sacramental life, Catholic parishes, Catholic social teaching, I think they're going to be fewer, but much more personally invested and reflective about their engagement in the future.
Thank you. Goodness, we better stop, but I could carry on talking about this all evening with everybody. This has been so fascinating. What a wonderful bunch of papers. So a virtual round of applause from all of us. And thank you so much. As you said, lots of our presenters have got their email addresses on our presenter paper, or you can find people through their academic profiles. So do get in touch if this is something you want to follow up with. And thank you for brilliant questions, very thought-provoking and interesting. So we'll see you back in the main stage at 5 o'clock for Alana Harris. I'm very excited about this presentation, speaking about her work on. So we've had sociologists, anthropologists, theologians, now we've got a historian. So what a wonderful interdisciplinary conference this is. So yes, back at 5 o'clock for Alana, and enjoy your coffee. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.